Welcome to the Samson Strength Coach Collective. On today's episode, we have Brad Rains, Assistant Strength and Conditioning Coach at the Air Force Academy. I love episodes when we get to talk with coaches who work with some of the atypical populations within strength and conditioning. So Ivy League coaches, right, where sometimes the focus is more on academics than it is on athletics. And then now speaking with Brad, it was really, really cool to hear about Air Force training and what it's like to work with Air Force athletes and people who will go on to serve their country and serve a larger purpose beyond sports once they graduate. I thought it was really, really cool to hear his perspective. Obviously, he's a great coach, but he works with great athletes as well. And so it was great to hear from somebody who fosters a great training environment. And he would just speak about a bunch of different things related to the Air Force Academy. I could have talked to Brad all day. I think we even talked for an hour after the show afterwards. So he's a great dude, great coach. And so I'm excited for you all to hear him and his thoughts on training. As always, a little awkward pause. As always, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy. What's going on, Samson Strength Coach Collective listeners? On today's episode, we have Brad Rains, Assistant Strength and Conditioning Coach and Physical Education Instructor at the Air Force Academy. Brad, thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. There's actually, in our kind of pre-show talk on the phone, there was probably about 6 different topics that we can dive into today. So I'm excited to see where this episode leads us, but there's certainly some things I definitely want to touch on. In the meantime, can you just give us your background in strength and conditioning and athletics, and then what's brought you to the Air Force Academy?
Yeah, man. It's probably longer than needed kind of explanation, but less than traditional path getting here. So I graduated from the University of New Orleans in 2005. Really, only goal at that point in life was to be a cop or a firefighter. To be honest with you. So shortly after that happened, Hurricane Katrina hit. So I was born and raised in New Orleans. Hurricane Katrina hit. Displaced for weeks, really, like a lot of people. And then afterwards, didn't really have any place to really go. Most cities and jurisdictions didn't really know what was going to be going on. So it gave me an opportunity, and I wound up joining the United States Air Force. So I joined in March of 2006. So I left for basic training in March 2006, and I became a combat firefighter in the Air Force. So left, went off, became a firefighter in the Air Force. A few years later, got offered a job back home in the fire department. So they gave me an early release. I did about 3 years in active duty, and then I came home to serve an extra couple years in the reserves and got on back home. So when I got back home, most firemen have like second jobs, right? None of them get paid enough. But most of them have second jobs. I cut grass with my brother for a really long time. And then I had this opportunity. So I guess reverse back, like most people in the military, in the 2005-ish, 2006 time frame, CrossFit was really big. Arguably still is, but it was really big. So got back home. I got into it when I was in the military. What a great outlet for a competitive person with nothing really else to do. So got back home, was cutting grass, and then found a gym, started training there, and they gave me an opportunity to become a coach. It's probably interesting. There'll probably be a lot of comments in the comment section about that in general, CrossFit in general. I'll probably agree with all of them, to be honest with you. But it gave me a real opportunity to just be in front of people and to kind of be a coach for such a diverse group of folks. And that really led to kind of getting into a lot of different stuff. So I started training a lot of firefighters I was working with, a lot of firefighters from other jurisdictions, some police officers, some youth athletes. I went and started working towards my USA weightlifting, sports performance, and advanced sports performance courses. I got to work with Gail Hatch and Dr. Kyle Pierce in Louisiana, 2 really big names in weightlifting down south, which was really awesome. And then at some point along the way, I kind of thought like this could be a thing that I really do at a high level, and I decided to go try to take the CSCS. So unknowingly, I just kind of bought the book. It was like I'm just gonna study for this thing, and with 8 years removed from undergrad. And yeah, it was a lot more than anticipated, but I did study for it. I did complete it. And then, I started looking for an opportunity at the collegiate level, the high school level. So I had a few interviews with some institutions. I won't name them, but I did not get those jobs as an intern. I don't think they were looking to hire a 31-year-old intern to fetch hurdles and be yelled at. But I wound up calling Tim Kinnering at Loyola University. He was at Loyola University at the time. He's now the director of high performance for the NOLA Gold professional rugby team in New Orleans. But I called him, left him a voicemail. He called me back. We met up at Starbucks. We talked for about an hour, and he was like, "Yeah, man, I'd love to bring you on." I think partially he needed help. It was him by himself with 15 teams, and I was a body, but he gave me a shot, man, and that's kind of where it started for me, was at Loyola University as a volunteer assistant. So I got to do that for a while and work under Tim, which is just a great experience. And then my girlfriend, now wife, we decided we wanted to change a scenery, a change of pace, and we up and moved to Colorado. So quit all my jobs, quit everything, had nothing to do. So we moved, and we got here, and I hit up the Air Force Academy and was like, "Hey, I'd love to come by and meet you and just see your facility, talk shop." And they were nice enough to allow me to come in and do that. And I was there, and I just kind of was like, "Hey, I'd love to come back and hang out and watch y'all coach." And they said, "Sure." So I don't know, day after, 2 days later, I showed up. I was like, "Man, can I come back again?" And they're like, "Yeah, you can come back again." And next thing you know, I was just kind of there every day. Yeah, probably to some I don't know if they were all super stoked about it, but I just kind of showed up every day. And so yeah, at some point in time, one of the strength coaches there was going on maternity leave, and they kind of looked at me and asked me if I'd be willing to take over her teams. So I'm always grateful to her and her child. They asked if I'd be willing to take over her teams, and I did. And it was, again, just another experience that I got to be in the room and get to do that, and got to participate as a member of that staff, even in a volunteer role. I finally did get a job for a hot minute at a D3 school down the road. I wasn't there very long, and a position to open up the Air Force Academy, and I applied for it. I got it. It was an overhire position. So basically, this month to this month, and if we have money, we'll see what happens. So my first overhire contract, I think, was 6 months long. So was just hoping to get renewed, and it got renewed. And that, a few months later, and a few months after that, they offered me like the final position. I've been there ever since. So yeah, slightly different than the normal kind of undergrad GA route, but yeah, it's a fun ride getting here for sure.
Well, you're the exact type of person I like speaking with on the podcast, right? Because you take all these experiences and you apply them differently to how you approach strength and conditioning.
Yeah.
And so it's really exciting to me, especially I've mentioned this in the past. We've had somebody like Kevin Darmody who came on, who became a strength coach at, I don't want to say the wrong age, but at least over 50s.
Yeah.
And, it's, as a younger strength coach, it's really disheartening to see how many of my friends leave the field. And so understanding that, maybe it's just a couple more years that they can stick it out. For some of the situations, it doesn't really fit. But to see people who are able to enter the field at the age of 30, you've been coaching for that time frame, but to then enter the field and actually make a full-time position out of it and do something that you love every day, that's really encouraging to me. Those are the stories I like to focus on a little bit more.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just optimist, and I only like hearing the rainbow and sunshine stories, but ultimately those are the ones that make me feel great and make me understand that the field is moving forward too, because again, you can bring those different perspectives with you. Did you always have college in your mindset, or when would the idea of becoming a full-time strength and conditioning coach really start to resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think really the tactical space was more my initial kind of thought process. I knew being in college would be a lot of fun, and I thought working with collegiate level athletes would be fun. But obviously, my background in the military and the fire service kind of lended it to kind of more the tactical space. Um, I had the opportunity to kind of work with some youth athletes, and when I say youth, I mean maybe high school level athletes, and to see like the level of progression there, and in a short amount of time, just their brains and their bodies kind of starting to like connect and work together was really a lot of fun, and something I really enjoyed after I started doing it. Um, because while the tactical space is great, the tactical space is also it's the tactical space. It's a group of uh, alpha kind of men and women who want to go hard every day, and while that's important, sometimes it was like hard to get them to take a beat a little bit.
Mm.
Um, but being able to kind of switch gears and have athletes understand like the goal is to be an athlete, not to be a weight room warrior, right? Like the goal is to be really good at your sport, and to kind of see them, take that and be like, okay, and then once I got to the college level, it's like, no, this is where it's at. Like this is where I kind of want to be. So I think it was initially tactical, and then became kind of like collegiate level athletics after I worked with some. Yeah.
No, and that's the cool piece too, right? Is you have different avenues, and mine on a micro level would be I always thought I was going to be a football strength coach, and all of a sudden, if you asked me today if I'd ever work football again, I'd say hell no. And no offense to football, it's just I
Right.
fell in love with basketball,
Yeah.
and so that's the cool piece about this field too, is that there are subsections, there are different things that you can do, and ultimately you get to find what you truly enjoy doing. Back to the experience piece and looking at things differently, how do you kind of take your experience from being a firefighter and working these different jobs to now being a full-time strength coach?
Yeah, I think it's perspective, really. It gives me a tremendous amount of perspective, both military service and fire service. Um, there's just bigger things, and that's not just special to those two types of positions. It's for all of us. Like sports are important, athletics are important, but there's perspective there. Like being a good person's important, right? Like we have that opportunity as strength coaches to not only assist these people into being better at their given or their chosen craft, but we get to help them, especially these young athletes, become better people. And I think having that perspective gives me something to always lean into, especially when athletes, they get hurt, or they have a bad year, or whatever that may be, when things are not going their way. um, it's not a I don't like to use it as a, oh, this isn't that bad, this is worse kind of situation. But I think being able to relay, like, you're working hard, your effort counts, like you're a good person, you're a great teammate, like continue to do those things, and this other stuff will kind of like fall in line. I think it's helpful. And I think having that perspective, being in those other positions, gives me a little bit of that.
The dose of perspective is the healthiest medicine that you can
Yeah.
get, right? And it really makes you appreciate what you have. I even today I met somebody with a physical disability, and we spoke for just a second, and it was like something on a super simple level. He was just talking about working out and what he tries to do, and what his limitations are. And I remember being super upset that I had to train and do a specific workout today that I didn't want to do. And at the end of the day, it was like, man, this guy would kill to do anything that I'm
Yep.
able to do. And he works 10 times harder than I do. So that perspective, kind of gave me energy for the rest of the day and rest of the week to understand that I've really got it in a great spot. And again, not even to compare it, from what one situation is to the other, but understanding that there are things that are bigger about what we do than just lifting weights.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, we talked about this in the pre-show, and I didn't even think I mentioned this part, right? But I was with Texas Tech, and we went up and did scrimmage against the Air Force Academy with women's basketball, and then we did some specific training afterwards. And it was based around Air Force training and smaller exercises, team building exercises, and this is what I was really excited to have you on and speak with you about as well. what does the Air Force training look like, and what does that mean to you? Is it different from what you've seen in other collegiate weight rooms? Are there things that stick out to you? And then how do you continue to create that environment with your athletes?
Yeah. The Air Force Academy is a special place, and I think only the other service academies would probably be able to kind of understand what that means. To give a little bit of perspective and context, our training has to be different. Our cadets, just our regular everyday cadets, non-IC athletes, and to a great extent, even our IC athletes. I mean, they're up at 5:30, 05:30, right? They have personal time from, let's say, 05:30 to 0700, and then they have. This is a new schedule of what they call a schedule of calls starting this year, but they'll have a common use period between 07 and I'll be exact, 07:53, I believe. But I mean, it gives you an idea, like that's the kind of detail that each one of these cadets live by. Like we have from 07 to 07:53 to execute this thing. And then they have a 7-minute transition time, and first period starts at 0800, right? So their day to day is very very timed out, and in the midst of that, they're also walking everywhere. We don't have a very big campus, but it's big enough to where you're getting steps in. On top of that, our cadets take physical education, and you said in the intro, like I teach physical education as part of my job. So they take water survival, swim, boxing, combatives. I mean, they are getting beat into the ground some days in some of these different PE classes, and rightfully so. I mean, I think over 50% of our cadets become pilots. So like being able to survive in water is an important piece of of being a pilot, right? So you combine all of those things, and then anywhere between, let's say 13:30, so 1:30 p.m. and maybe 2:30 p.m., the athletes finally walk down. So as a strength coach or as a sport coach, you're not seeing any of your athletes till possibly 1:30, 2:30 p.m. And then you kind of have a hard cutoff of 6 p.m. because at that point, you have to go back up to chow. You have to go back up to, if you need tutoring or you're working with a team for a project. So we really have about a 4-hour time frame to train 27 intercollegiate teams and over 1,000 athletes. We have one flagship weight room, which has 54 racks, and we have a secondary weight room that we call the dungeon, down in like the basement with no windows, but we could probably hold roughly 80 athletes in there. So yeah, our training becomes very much based on who's in season, how big the team is. The coaches have to communicate about what they're going to do that day. You have to be able to be flexible. You can't all want to use the track side of the weight room because we can't have 60 athletes on the track side. We can only have 30.
So can you take us through exactly what the process looks like for a cadet from going to the academy to then serving? I was able to get a little bit of an understanding of this when we went up with Texas Tech to see the academy, but I think a lot of the general population doesn't really understand exactly what goes into the process.
Yeah. So once a person's gets their commitment to the academy, they come in. They start out at basic training. So actually, today was what they call I Day. So our class of 28 or class of 29, 28, they started today. So we had about 1,000 young men and women running all over campus today, getting their boots and their shoes and getting ready for basic training. So once they graduate basic training, they will be what they call fourth year cadet or freshman. So that's kind of where it starts, and every year kind of leads into the next, rightfully so, right? So they kind of start off in this role of kind of understanding the military, understanding followership, how to follow a leader, and then it kind of grows over their time, just like normal school would. And then by the time they're a senior, they very big day comes around at the academy. Job drops come. So job drops are always really fun. They kind of they get racked and stacked throughout their career, and they have an MPA, an OPA, PEA. They have all these different ways to kind of be graded and racked and stacked throughout their 4 years. And then they get jobs. So, I don't know all the behind the scenes on how those things happen, but I do know it's a fun day for all of the seniors when they finally get to learn what their job's going to be. And then after that, job dependent. Some of them will leave, go to kind of tech school, just like you would if you were enlisted. They'll go to their tech school. So, for instance, if you're going to be an intelligence officer in the Air Force, you'll graduate. You get about 60 days off to kind of go have some fun, and then they'll report to their tech school. Again, if you're an intel officer, for instance, you're going to go down to Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo, Texas. You're going to, learn your craft as an intel officer, and then you're going to go off into Big Air Force and be a second lieutenant in Big Air Force. If you're a pilot, it changes a good bit depending on a number of things. You go to kind of like this basic flight school when you graduate, and then you go to like the next flight school, and then they kind of start to determine what airframe you're going to fly, and then you go to kind of like these specialized flight schools. It's a pretty long, intensive program to become a pilot, especially if you're dealing with certain airframes. So basically, yeah, I mean, they come in, around this time to start their career, and they go through 4 years, and depending on their job, they're either boots on the ground starting, or they're kind of be in training for a minute, and then they go out and they do great things, man. It's kind of fun to watch.
It's just so cool. And it was so cool for me to hear that process originally too. And honestly, it was nice for me to look at some of our athletes who, got a little dose of perspective as well, right? To steal a term
Yeah.
from earlier, for them to understand that, hey, at Texas Tech, you get paid to be an athlete. You're here, you're on scholarship completely. And then also you get the NIL money and all the great things that come with it. And your one job is basketball. And a lot of times you have a lot less pressure on you in a lot of those other areas. Now, there is pressure with that 100%, but to understand exactly what these cadets go through, and then to not even know what your exact job's going to be until you graduate, right? Like, it's just all these small details that kind of stack up that make it such a cool training environment. But you mentioned the different training, you mentioned the different physical education that they have to go through, and all these things on top of the sport. How do you manage the mental load as a strength coach for them?
Yeah, and I think we touched on it a little, a while back, kind of using that experience to be able to relate perspective to them. It's a big thing, right? The mental toll that it takes. I mean, you got to imagine being 18 years old, leaving home. You show up to this place, you don't know anybody. You go through kind of 6 weeks of learning all this new stuff. I mean, relearning how to march or how to walk, essentially, right? Learning how to tie your shoes, learning how to fold a shirt. All these things that you think you nailed down over the last 18 years. And the military is going to teach you how to do it a different way. All while under this immense pressure to excel. And then you get into your freshman year, and it never really stops. I mean, that kind of mental toll doesn't end after basic, or doesn't end after your freshman year, because you'll always be expected to do more. You'll always be expected to step up, and yeah, it does take it does take a lot for our cadet athletes to kind of understand it, be able to absorb it. I think prioritize it, manage it. I think one of the best things that we do, or our cadets do, is really find the ones who are good at it. And I see this in our athletes, and figure out what they're doing and how they're doing it, and then kind of following in their footsteps. I mean, I can think of a number of athletes. If you were to ask me off the top of my head, I could probably name 15, right? Who I would say, these men and women got it. Like, they understood this place. And then I could probably name another 30 of them who kind of became that person after that original person graduated, right? Like, so I think you see that a lot in what we do, and it's usually very helpful as a strength coach. And I would say probably as a sport coach, like anywhere else, right? You're having those conversations. I mean, the very first thing I ask my athletes as they're walking in the door, how you doing today? And it's not if I hear good, I'm digging deeper, right?
Mhm.
Like if I hear, oh, I'm doing good, it's like, how good? On a scale of 1 to 10, I just start kind of messing around with them to get a gauge. Like you can really tell a lot from someone when they say like, I'm fine, I'm good. And then you dig in a little bit and it's like, oh, we just had a huge exam in, aeronautical engineering, right? And you're like, oh, how'd it go? And you can dive into that, or they don't always share with, obviously, they don't always share things with their coaches, but you know, being able to ask them like, how you doing, or what's going on, and they give you just a little bit so you can pull at that thread, and then you get to the end of the conversation and you realize, them and their best friend just got into an argument, or they didn't do well on their standards and eval or their room inspection, which doesn't seem like a big deal. But again, when you're racked and stacked over 4 years of your life to determine whether or not you're going to be a pilot or an intel officer or a missiles officer, those things matter to them immensely. So I think it's understanding as a coach what we don't think is a big deal, right? Because in our minds, like wins and losses are a big deal, championships are a big deal. To them, there's an added layer there, and I think it's just respecting it. I don't think it's trying to just push it aside like, oh well, we still got to compete. It's more or less like, I get it. Um, how can we use this? How can we like move forward and use this as an opportunity to try to get better and make our teammates better, make our team better? And it's not an easy task. It's certainly easy for me because I'm not the one in their shoes, but trying to get them to understand that we can do it, like we can do it as a group, as a collective, I think is important.
Well, I guess my question too is, you speak about not being in their shoes necessarily, but you are an Air Force member. How does that relate to your athletes now?
Yeah. So I was enlisted. So for the folks who know a little bit about that, there's a huge discrepancy between being enlisted, kind of an enlisted member of the armed forces versus an officer. Um, so yeah, I think I probably suffer from it a little bit, like a small chip on my shoulder, just because I know these young men and women are going to graduate and instantly outrank friends of mine who are still in. Um, but I use that too, right? Like I try to use that as well. Like understand the huge responsibility you carry when you leave this place. I have friends who joined with me in 2006. They have multiple deployments. They are 20 years in or 18 years into what will probably be a 30-year career for them. And when these young men and women, I mean, literally the day they graduate and they put second lieutenant bars on, they outrank every single one of them. And it's a huge responsibility. So I have a small chip on my shoulder because I feel like, they're going to be living the good life in the armed forces as officers. But in reality, they're going to be shouldering a responsibility that I would never have been able to understand at their age at that time in my life. So a lot of respect to them. But again, it's perspective, like giving them that idea and letting it sink in for a minute. Like I could still be in. Are you ready to give me a direct order? And their facial expressions will say a lot when they're like, no, I'm not ready. Like, yeah, I know, but we got time to get you there. You know what I mean? So it's always a fun building the kind of relationship with them.
Well, you're a better man than me because I would have not a little chip. I'd probably have a big chip. I just remember and completely be unfair on any interactions I've had.
It's probably bigger than I'm leaning on.
Well, fair enough. You mentioned one thing too that I thought was really interesting, and I've never. I mean, I just personally haven't heard this topic. It was about followership, and so I'm really curious to see if you could dive into that just a little bit more for me because every team has leaders, right? And if everybody tries to be a leader, then you're not going to be a very good team. And people do need to be followers, and that's not a bad thing. You are a team member, and you can still execute your role. Can you just dive into that a little bit more for me?
Yeah, I can try. Again, I think this is something that our sister services would be able to speak to as well. It's something where the cadet wing is run to a great extent by our cadets. There is oversight by permanent party, by our officers in charge. They're called AOCs, Air Officer Commanders. So there is oversight, but to a great extent, our every year you get a little more responsibility, you get a little more leadership responsibility. But that first year is really a golden opportunity to see the folks in front of you and understand how it's done, while also kind of learning the military life. I don't I don't think, I mean, I've never really thought about it, but I guess thinking about it now, it's not very much unlike a team, an athletic team, right? Or an IC team. Like, hopefully your IC teams, your teams have really strong senior, junior leaders. And hopefully you have some really good freshmen who have leadership qualities, but aren't ready to express those qualities just yet because it's not time, right? And I think, and there's always a one-off. There's always you always get maybe a young 18, 19-year-old athlete who comes in and just has it, and you never want to kind of like push that down. That's not a bad thing, but I think for the most part, especially in a situation that we are at the academy, it's kind of an intuitive process. Because there's not a freshman that walks into our institution and like just gets it. It's not built for that. It's really built for you to follow in the footsteps of those in front of you, and it lends to a very good understanding of how our processes work, and it lends to a really good transition from that followership to that leadership as they collect more time, more reps, right? Like, as they get better at those things, they can take on more. And our sport coaches, the coaches that I've worked with and been fortunate enough to work with a number of teams, they all do a really good job of understanding that process as well, and giving those seniors and those juniors leadership opportunities over the team. So it kind of all works hand in hand for both the military side and the athletic side.
I guess what I love so much about it, or what interests me so much, is there's a little bit more of the structure behind it. Because exactly like you mentioned, right, there is that process on teams, and again, you're maybe getting one freshman every 2-3 years or so who can stand out and be a leader right away. Honestly, probably more rare than that. But ultimately, I think there's been a big push in on the civilian side of strength and conditioning, for collegiate strength and conditioning. That's going to be a long title one day, the civilians collegiate
Yeah,
strength and
right.
conditioning title. Yeah. There's been a big push for individuality and ultimately kind of going away from the team aspect of things, which I think there's benefits to it, obviously. But at the same time, like, just to give a quick example, I saw one of our freshman players came in a couple years ago, and they had to put up a picture of the animal that they thought they were, right? And so she came in, she put up a goat, and she was like, "I'm the goat. Like, I'm gonna be really good." And it was just like, you have no clue what you
Yeah.
just did. Like, you basically just threw a grenade in the room, and then
Yeah.
just waited for it to go off. Like, and so I've seen a lot of those kind of behaviors, and to understand where there's a structure behind it, and then to understand, okay, maybe it's not my time yet, and I do have these qualities, because that athlete does have those qualities. That athlete's really talented. That athlete can be really good, but she just chose the wrong time to kind of flex that muscle, and it bit her in the butt for the first couple months. And
Yeah.
it took a lot of gaining the trust back from the team versus having a structured system where it's understood that my time will come. I will have more responsibility in the future. But for the moment being, I should just play my role specifically. I like that aspect.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to be said for it, just from a growth standpoint. Being a great athlete is one thing. Being a great person, a great teammate, it's a whole nother thing. I know some great people who are on athletic teams who are not good, and respectively not good compared to the, maybe the people they're playing against. Against me, they're amazing, right? but yeah, but they're still a big part of that team because of the person they are, and not necessarily the athletic qualities they bring. And I think there's no better place to witness that than at a military academy, because it is that important. It is that important to give someone, a younger athlete, someone to kind of look at and follow and understand, like, this is what it's supposed to look like. Because the athletic part will come, and it's so personally dependent, but the leadership part is, to me, just so important, and it's such a learned experience, right? Like your example's perfect, right? Great athlete, gonna be great, but just throwing it out there, I'm the best. Yeah, I just don't, that just wouldn't fly that well at our institution. And I would say most of our freshmen probably never feel that way, simply because the level of things that they are not going to be good at when they step foot into our institution is so immense that it's hard to be that confident. Again, going to basic training and relearning how to essentially walk and step with 40 other people is a humbling experience, because you feel like you've been walking for 15 years, like you got it down. And then you show up and it's a reminder, like, I don't know how to walk right. So that whole first year is just enlightening for them. So it's fun to watch, though. It's fun to kind of see that happen.
Well, but then you think back, you can even relate it to the internship process, right? Where you first come in, and I thought I knew how to lift. I was lifting for at least 10 years at that point, and all of a sudden I found out really quickly that was not the case. And so it broke me down, but then it built me back up to a point where now I love being a coach, and I love doing the things that I do on a daily basis. And so it's interesting to see how going through that process can then help you and better serve you in the future, right? It's temporary pain for a long-term gain. When you look at the overall structure of the Air Force Academy itself, but then specifically how you train, is there anything that you think coaches in a non-military academy structure could apply to their athletes or what they do?
Yeah, I think something that I've kind of learned, again, coming into this space years ago. I remember the first program I wrote for lacrosse. We got through basically the warm up, movement prep, and like half the first block, and it was over. And it was a really eye-opening experience, because previous to that, you would have, or I felt like I had, so much more time. So time being time being a commodity, right? And something that all these different vectors at our institution are trying to get from each cadet. They all want more time, right? The dean of faculty wants more time. The cadet wing wants more time for military stuff. The athletic department wants more time. So I remember writing that program, and we got through essentially like the very first lift in like 2 sets of it. So for me, it very much became, how can I be the most efficient, and how can I use my time the wisest? And if you weren't at the CSCCA a few weeks ago, the national conference, one of my colleagues actually did an incredible presentation. Her name's Taylor Lord Becky. She did just this great presentation on optimizing the human weapon system, but then went into great detail about how bodyweight training can be so imperative to athletic success and understanding how to do it, and talked a lot about leg circuits. And it's been something that I never thought I would start implementing, but the ability to get in high quality work with little equipment, with little time, and be able to look at it in a way like we can progress it, we can regress it, we can use it in season, we can use it out of season, I think has been the most impactful for me. I think the people who went to her presentation also walked away with kind of that same thought. And it was something I learned when I got to the academy through Coach Taylor. And then something I think grew during COVID for us specifically too. We weren't allowed in our weight room. All the cadets left. we all had our different constraints as strength coaches dealing with the pandemic, but I think it really drove home this idea of like, we can get in really solid work and we don't need all the weights and barbells and racks. They're awesome to have, and they are definitely essential to what we do in a grand macro view. But day to day, like I said, depending on their day, they come in and they are crushed, or they are, whatever the case may be. Loading up their back with a bar, loading up their spine with a back squat might not be my best option. But if I can get some competitive juices going, if I can get them to have a little fun and put some like constraints on, you have this long to do this leg circuit and we're only doing this many rounds, and you're you work, your partner rests, high five when y'all switch, like it really just pays off so big in the long run. Because your other option is just to continue to crush them, right? To continue to put stress on them. But if you build it inside your system and the way you operate, I think bodyweight training has been a huge piece of what I've been doing more of in the past 6 years, partially because it's just really useful stuff, and partially because there are days, like I said, when you don't have room. There's just nowhere to go. And all of a sudden you find a 15 by 30 foot space of turf in the corner, and you try to figure out what you can do. So I hope that would be useful. I mean, I think most places probably have a slightly better way of executing time frames and stuff like that. But for us, we don't.
Well, two things. My first is that when I saw the title of Optimizing the Human Weapon System, I thought that was the sickest title I've ever seen for a presentation ever. So that's just, please let her know that I said that, because that was eye-grabbing for sure.
Yeah.
But, the second piece, and I guess my thoughts on this, what I think is really cool is, my speech is always that we've got the weights. We don't need necessarily the technology aspect. We don't need necessarily all of the, let's say we have sports scientists on staff who can monitor specific loads and all those things, right? But you take it to another level and you break it down even further, which is at the bare bones of it. If you have athletes who are already super fatigued, you don't have that much time, and you don't have a ton of space, then what can you still get out of training? Because there's always still something to be done. And so I love that philosophy in itself. And I think it can be applied to the collegiate strength and conditioning realm, high school, private, whatever it may be, because there are going to be times where your athletes come in absolutely crushed, and you just know you have to do something a little bit different, and you want to do something like exactly like you mentioned, get the competitive juices flowing. I can think about October practices. Those are always the toughest ones for basketball, because that's when, first of all, from a physical standpoint, you're practicing for a long time during the day. And then second of all, from a mental standpoint, you haven't played anybody else, and you've just been playing each other for 3 straight weeks, and you're absolutely sick of it. And so why not have a session that does something different, that you still get something competitive and you still get something out of the session as a whole? And so I think that can certainly be applied to strength and conditioning as a whole. And I love just the perspective of it. And if I have the least optimal conditions at certain times, what can I still get out of this training? Because you can't just throw in the towel and say, all right, well, we're not going to lift today, and we're going to sit around and play patty cake because that's the best option for me.
Yeah. And it's become quite institutionally, it's become something that is a thing, right? Like, we use it in physical education. So we use these different leg circuit options, and we teach it in PE, and a lot of our coaches use it. So if you were to be walking around, the athletic department, or even up on the hill, which is where kind of like the cadets live and everything, and you say, and we've named them. So I have a bunch of colleagues, they're very smart, but we put like fun names to it. So we have one called Netherworld, as goofy as it sounds, but we use it in basic training. Like, that's one of the exercises, or one of the things that they're allowed to use in basic training as a method of PT, is this little thing called the Netherworld. But if you walk around the hill and you say, hey, you ask any cadet, like, hey, you want to do the Netherworld, you will get some sort of response. Like, it has become a thing that they know, because it's not just our intercollegiate athletes who are doing it. It's our PE. Every freshman takes physical education, or basic physical education, and that's what we teach. And they do these things with us in that class. And then you turn around and you do it with, your volleyball team or your track team or your hoops team. And then they're all friends, right? So so when they're like, oh man, practice was tough today, coach had us do Netherworld. And then like, oh, I had PE last semester. We did that too. And it's almost building bridges, man. It's kind of funny. It's kind of funny to see how they all kind of react to the same thing and how big it's gotten. It's kind of catches like wildfire. Now it's just fun because the IC population and the general kind of cadet population being able to connect on this one thing, which is just the most random thing. And it's lunges and jumping split squats. Like it's not like this crazy thing. It's basic stuff that you can do in three by three, space. So it's really been fun to kind of see that progress over 6 years, to kind of see how that worked out.
Well, how unique is that, right? Because you look at a typical college campus, the way those people would most likely connect would be having a shared class,
Right.
or and how rare is that occasion? Or maybe you see somebody on campus and they had a great game, and so you approach them and talk to them. Then to have something that can unite an entire campus, like you said, anybody would have a reaction to it of some sort, good, bad, or indifferent.
Right.
Ultimately, it's really something really unique, and so I think that's a really cool aspect for me to learn about the Air Force Academy today too. Is just they're all connected, obviously, through this larger mission. But at the end of the day, there's these smaller things that break down and create a stronger sense of community within the school too.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Brad, thank you, man. I really appreciate you coming on. I mean, I could go all day with this because I had probably about 3 more questions lined up, but that would be another episode. So I think we even joked about it. Maybe a 2-parter. We'll have you back on to talk about what y'all do as a staff out there too. But in the meantime, thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, man, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate getting the opportunity to kind of brag on our cadet athletes and our institution a little bit, man. This is really cool. Thanks.
Absolutely. If anybody did want to reach out or had any questions, do you have social media they could follow, or no?
my social media is kind of non-existent. I have one. It's mostly just pictures of me and my dog camping. So
There you go.
yeah, if you wanted to, I don't even know what my handle is. I think it's Brad Rains 47 at Gmail, I believe. But yeah, you can always. I don't know if you have show notes or anything, but I can put my email. It's bradley.rains@afacademy.af.edu. It's a very short email address. But yeah, if anybody ever wants to reach out, I love to I like following people on social media. I love to see kind of what they're doing. But I do zero posting, I think. It's kind of sad, but yeah, more than welcome to follow me.
I think that's good for your mental health space, right?
Probably, yeah.
It makes a difference. Yeah, I'll post videos all the time, and people who I know have no business talking to me about the lifts will say something, and I'm just like, I can't get it out of my head. I'm like, this guy's no clue, and I just start losing my mind. It's like, no, he's probably 13, and watch the Ronnie Coleman video, and that's where his knowledge is.
Oh yeah, no, I stick to mostly camping and hiking and a lot of weightlifters. I follow a lot of our US weightlifters, but other than that, things I post are just sad. They're just literally pictures of my dog.
It's as happy as it gets.
Yeah, it's me and him like camping out in the middle of nowhere. It's the best part of living in the state, man. It's just your ability to go do things off the grid a little bit. And we're going out this weekend. Super excited. We're going to go hit a little spot and camp out for like two or 3 nights.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I guess if our listeners are looking for more of a Bob Ross vibe from a strength coach for a calming,
yes.
Social media space, that'll be it.
or almost, yeah, or just like nothing, almost non-existent. But yeah, they should definitely follow. So I mentioned her already, Coach Lord Becky, Taylor Lord Becky. She does a lot. And then we have Air Force or AF_sports med. And we actually use that as our strength conditioning platform, and we post a lot of stuff there. So if anybody feels like they want to learn a little more about leg circuits and stuff like that, we actually do post a ton of stuff on there. So that would be a good one to follow for sure.
That'd be a good challenge. Have everybody listen and try to complete the Netherworld.
Oh, dude. Yeah. I've done it. It's not that enjoyable. That's why you always get but it's always like you finish it and you're like, okay, you know what I mean?
Yep.
But yeah, that was a creation of another one of our staff members, Bryce Taylor. He's also the one who named it. So
It's a sick name.
yeah, if you build it, you get to name it, I guess. He's really good at naming some of these different lake circuits. Coach Taylor just names them like numbers. I'm like Lake Circuit 1, 2, 3. Coach Bryce comes in and puts some fun names. We've got Squat Apocalypse. Yeah, we got some fun ones. So, but they all resonate, and they all come with a reaction. So it's always kind of fun.
That's awesome. Wow. All right. Well, I'm going to follow through with our listeners. I'm going to make sure that at least somebody completes it. And if I guess
Right.
I'll have to be the martyr of the group. If not, it'll be me.
Sounds good, man.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Brad.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely.